It's 10:05. Time to roll, then catch up. All right. I'd like to welcome everyone to this panhandling ordinance discussion today. Appreciate all the entities that are here and all that have bringing information to the table. There is an agenda. I don't know if we're going to share it with everyone or not. Oh, there is. Okay, there is copies for the public on that. And let's get started. Administrator, am I going to go to you first?
Sure. Thank
Okay.
you, Commissioner, and good morning to all. The purpose in the background, as stated by you, is just to start a conversation surrounding Augusta's panhandling ordinance. While there are several things already on the books, the Columbia County ordinance was the not so much the impotence, but definitely the most recent ordinance that was passed by our neighboring municipality that kind of kicked off this conversation. Just a little bit of background. On September 5th, the Augusta Commission approved scheduling a work session concerning this matter, hence the reason why this meeting is scheduled today. We have several community partners as well as the City of Augusta employees from various agencies as well as departments that can weigh in on how this would affect their particular operations as well as how it would affect the City of Augusta. So from here, I would like to, one, discuss any current ordinances that we have on the books, and particularly the ordinance as presented by Columbia County.
Okay.
So the Law Department.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning. I would like to call one of our attorneys who works over code enforcement and planning. It's Mr. Samuel Meller. He'll give an explanation about the ordinances for you.
Okay.
Samuel Meller, Senior Staff Attorney. The Law Department believes that passing the Columbia County ordinance without serious modification is unwise. And the reason that is because most of the Columbia County ordinance is unconstitutional under federal law. And I'm prepared to discuss that in great detail, and I have quotes from various federal courts that will demonstrate that. But since 1999, solicitation, begging, panhandling has been protected First Amendment activity in Georgia. And in 2015, First Amendment law changed quite drastically at the U.S. Supreme Court with a case called Reed versus Gilbert. And what Reed versus Gilbert basically did was it eliminated a lot of the time, place, manner, intermediate scrutiny cases that we have in the United States. And basically what Reed versus Gilbert said was that any statute by state, federal, or local municipalities that were content-based would be subject to strict scrutiny because panhandling solicitation is considered First Amendment protected activity. The courts have been very, very, very strictly looking at similar ordinances and striking them down. So the recent case out of Florida, which is Messina versus City of Fort Lauderdale, that's for the citation 546 F sub 3rd 1227, basically said that aggressive panhandling the Fort Lauderdale ordinance was very similar to the proposed Columbia County ordinance, including ATM restrictions, cafe restrictions, and aggressive panhandling definitions and expansions as well as territory. And the Fort Lauderdale ordinance was struck down in its entirety as being unconstitutional. And the Messina case went through a lot of other factors that are very similar to the Columbia County ordinance and demonstrated various cases across the country where those factors were struck down. And so the law department recommends that we walk away, that the commission focuses on not solicitation or panhandling. That is a protected First Amendment activity. To get an ordinance that would survive constitutional muster would be very difficult. The focus that the law department recommends is focusing on the subsidiary activity that the commission wishes to regulate, and regulate that, because it is a very, 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 very narrow hole that this ordinance can pass through to be considered constitutional, considering that the First Amendment law has been changed very drastically since 2015.
Okay, well, you dropped the bombshell to start the meeting, that's for sure. It's going to be frontline news that Columbia County passes unconstitutional, this one's going to be a story, I assure you. I thought that this ordinance was more about conduct instead of expression, and I guess then in your mind, do we have to start new? Do you have one that you know of that we can implement? Because, I mean, we got to do something different than we're doing now.
So we currently have an ordinance on the books that relate to aggressive panhandling, and it prohibits such in defined districts such as Broad Street in the Augusta Common District, as well as the Armstrong Galleria District. While this is already something that's on the books, we've already had the marshal's office as well as the sheriff's office submit 311 requests in relation to individuals that are panhandling. Unfortunately, it is mostly in relation to homelessness. Augusta 311, since 2022 data I've requested, pull almost 200 reports of individuals that are doing such. So in addition to that, I think this is more of an enforcement challenge. If we already have something on the books related to aggressive panhandling, what are the steps that we currently take as well as steps that should be taken regarding enforcement?
Yeah, I agree. I think the interesting thing about that is that I feel like the aggressive panhandling or the issues that we're having are not downtown. They are, but the main issues we're having are main corridors: Peach Orchard, Wrightsboro Road, Washington Road. These people are jumping in front of traffic. These people are not from here. These people are working, a system, basically. And that's the issue for me, is like the safety component of things in those major corridors that are happening every day. So do we take the ordinance that are on the books and expand the footprint? Does that get us anywhere? Or I'm asking, yeah, sure.
If we even attempted to expand the footprint that we currently have, that would also likely be held unconstitutional, because it would no longer be narrowly tailored to a particular area. Countywide is too big. It's not nearly tailored enough to survive scrutiny before the courts. So that would not be a viable option for us.
So do y'all have a viable option? Because there are cities that have panhandling ordinances across this country, or things in place to where, people feel safer and they're not bothered as much. Like, do y'all have any options?
Attorney Mack, can you speak to that?
From a legal standpoint, we think it would be better to focus on the things that we sort of can control, such as most of the time these panhandlers are in the right-of-way, and so we might be able to do something concerning right-of-way maintenance that we could actually enforce upon people who are in it. But other than that sort of option, going after straight-up panhandling would not be a viable way for us to go.
Okay, Commissioner Johnson, I'll come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Mack, that's exactly along the lines of what I was going to suggest. Being that we do have this hurdle of constitutional rights, never thought that a constitutional right would be a hurdle, but in this case, it could be considered a hurdle. I think that, if you're having folks hanging out on off ramps at intersections of our interstates and things of that nature, and they are in the right of way, I think it's an easy fix for us to be able to address that. And I'm not sure, and I hate to even go down this route, but if someone is in that intersection, well, let me ask it this way. If someone is in the intersection, on an off-ramp, I-20 and Wheeler Road or wherever, just in those areas, what type of enforcement could we put in place? Would that just simply be, hey, you move? Would it be a fine in place? Would it be, what would the enforcement look like just for being in the right of way unauthorized?
Because someone present in the right of way would now present a safety issue, I would like for someone from the sheriff's office to speak to enforcement of those individuals, which, as we all know, most of the panhandling requests are made with someone in the right of way.
Okay.
And we have Lieutenant Silas here.
Yes. Right now, if
Can you use your mic, please? Can you use your mic? Thank you.
right now, we use a state charge 40-6-97 if they step into the roadway. And that's just not for the panhandlers of an individual, it's for groups. Groups that come out and actually solicit monies cannot go in the roadway either. The problem's not with them, being on the side of the road if they're just holding their sign, but once they step into the roadway, it is a safety concern, and we have cited them 46-97. The ordinance that we have right now, sometimes when we've written those citations for the downtown ordinances, they get thrown out in magistrate court. We do have calls downtown where the panhandlers, someone is outside having dinner with their family and they come up wanting to beg money. We've had them actually steal people's wallets at the tables and stuff like that. So we've had many instances, but the main charge that we use at the intersections is the state charge. Once they step into the roadway, it's a safety hazard, and we charge them with 46-97. The panhandling is just not downtown. It is countywide, as Commissioner Franham said. And we get complaints on it daily.
I do believe that we need to have something in place to like greater enforcement, because you're right, it is countywide. And again, when we first had this conversation, I mentioned that I wanted to be able to separate the organized panhandling from the actual need, right? And I made some references from some folks that we've seen while we've been out doing outreach, especially when I've just been on Broad Street just hanging around. But I think in this case, you said that it's not an issue if they're just on the side of the road holding their sign. That's not an issue at all, even if it's the right of way.
Basically, once they step into the right of way, we had a little 3-step process we were doing. Give them a warning the first time, the second was a citation, and the third time, if it could change their behavior of getting them to not going to the roadway, then we would take them to jail. That's the last thing we want to do with someone. Everybody thinks that the panhandlers that are out on these intersections or downtown are homeless. 99% of most of these folks that are doing this panhandling are not homeless.
And when you say can you say for the record, can you differentiate for the record the panhandlers that you're seeing and what that looks like versus what you're seeing with the homeless, just so that folks who are watching can understand that we're talking about two different groups of people? What does the panhandler look like in your mind?
Well, it's begging for money. The last one we had, he had $386 in his pocket that he had collected in about a 3-hour time. There's been many of folks out in the work industry that we've talked to, and they'll stop at these corners and ask them if they want to go to work, and they'll say, "Why don't I want to go to work?" and pull out their money, and show them, this is what I've made today. So, but most of these folks downtown, they come from the Maxwell House, they come from the Richmond Summit, they come from the Bon Air. I had a church group about 3 Saturdays ago at 25 and Tobacco Road, a church group now. They were from Bamberg, South Carolina. And I asked them, I said, why are y'all here collecting money? Because Augusta is a caring community. And so they know that they can collect monies, but those folks have to have permits. Before they can get out there and solicit, they have to have permission from whatever property they're on. Same thing with baseball, football, basketball organizations. They have to go through our department to get the permit, but they still cannot get in the roadway.
So there's nothing that we can do as far as our current ordinance to expand, so you said that there's not an issue for them to be on the side of the road. Is there any language that we can put in our current ordinance to enforce just being on the right of way with their signs? Because right now, if it's not an issue, then I think that that enforcement could be that we say you're not allowed on the right of ways you cannot solicit on the right of way at all. whether that's holding a sign, stepping out into the road, anything like that. And I think that'll get us to a better place with what everyone is trying to accomplish here.
And most of the problem that most of the calls we get for them being on the side of the roadway is they leave their trash. I can take you to about 12 places where the trash has been piled up. The marshal's department gets, whether it's on DOT property or county property, we have to get people out there just about on a weekly basis to get this place cleaned up, and people in this community are tired of it.
So can we get an answer from the law department on that last question? Is there anything that we can do with our current ordinance to kind of expand the enforcement of solicitation, whether that be with the sign or in the roadway or not? Is there anything that we can do on that vein
No.
because of the constitutional aspect of it?
So if you were to say, if for example, the ordinance was proposed that solicitation on rights of way are prohibited, that would be that would probably be held unconstitutional. The Messina case dealt with a right of way ordinance very similar to that and found it to be unconstitutional because there was no particular evidence, no particular studies, no cases of individuals getting hit while solicitation. I mean, when we're talking about what evidence that the courts consider, they're considering actual cases that where someone was soliciting and was hit in the roadway. Additionally, the Messina case also discusses that what is already prohibited, that is being in the roadway, you cannot attach that to protected First Amendment activity and then ban that. So it can't be in the roadway plus solicitation then becomes an ordinance violation because the solicitation is considered First Amendment protected activity. You can only maintain the right-of-way prohibition without the solicitation component.
Final question, Mr. Chairman. How do we address loitering in our community? Is there anything that we have on the books to address loitering?
We do have a loitering ordinance. I know that we've dealt with it. I remember dealing with it at the solicitor office, and we deal with it in the magistrate court.
Does that not apply to what we're talking about here?
I believe that the loitering ordinance has very specific definitions.
Because if I'm hanging out at the gas station, if I'm hanging out anywhere, I'm going to get removed. So, and again, this is simply just us trying to figure out a way to address the larger issue, not the need itself, like the actual folks are in need. I think the task force and our partners are doing a great job there.
So that would be, so again, there is a loitering ordinance on the books. It is, and that could be used by the marshals of the sheriff's office to control behavior that they consider loitering. That being said, it's going to be up to the individual officers to make that determination as to whether somebody is loitering versus engaging in protected First Amendment activity. And that is a very narrow band to make for a lot of law enforcement officers.
Yeah, and it's tough because it's not a crime to be in a public place. I mean, it's not a crime. And I think that's what makes this so difficult because, again, you have people who are actually in need. And the last thing I want to see is have some type of ordinance on the book that'll criminalize that. But then I also understand that you have people who are coming here and they're not in need. And I know that it's an organized effort. But again, it's not a crime to be in the public. So I guess we just need to have some more dialogue as to where we can go. So I'll yield the floor to my colleagues. I see there's others in the queue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Scott.
And I think my questions was on the line of Commissioner Johnson, too. Right now, we have an ordinance, but it's not doing anything that we wanted to do. So where do we go from here, and how do we get to what we want to address to keep people safe, for sure, to make sure the bad behavior is not tolerated in Augusta. So we're saying that we can't use Columbia County. So what's what's the next step? Do we have any idea where we need to go, or how to proceed?
I mean, there is a educational program I think we're going to talk about in a little bit here, but I think that's where we want to hear. I would definitely want to hear from everybody that's here that came to kind of see what their feelings are, next steps. I know there's definitely a street team that's helping and how they're handling things and holding people accountable and reconnecting families and that sort of thing. But I think once we hear from everybody else, maybe we'll have a better idea where we're going here in just a little bit. So, Commissioner Pulliam.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Frantum. My question is for Officer Silas. So you mentioned a couple of things, but when Commissioner Johnson asked, how do you differentiate homeless from versus panhandling, I know that you said most individuals are in fact panhandling and they're not homeless. My question is, how do you know the difference? Are the officers asking the individuals, are you homeless? Like, is there a question answer type? Okay.
We do. We also do a field interview card on them, and depending on whether they are homeless, we give them all the literature, all the resources that they need to get the assistance that they need, and we make our decision, based on that. But again, the majority of the ones we deal with are not homeless.
Okay. Is there a percentage though? Are you all keeping statistics on that? Is there some type of is there a record of who's homeless versus who's panhandling so that we can see real numbers?
No, there's not.
Okay, all right. And my next question is, because you mentioned that groups like the Church from Bamberg need permits, so do groups of students like cheer groups or band groups, a lot of individuals that we see out, especially during the weekend, and I happened to be going to Columbia County and saw some as well, right at that intersection of Columbia Road and what's that, Flowing Wells, I think. I see groups there. Do those groups of individuals, do they need to have permits to be able to be out? And
we asked him to contact Sergeant Barry Morrison, who heads that up, and basically he explains the rules and the regulations that apply to it. And they have to have permission from the property that they go onto as well. There's some businesses that don't want the crowds in there because they take up their parking spaces and stuff like that. So, but the biggest thing is they have young children as young as 7, 8 years old running out into the roadways trying to collect money, and it causes a safety hazard. So, they have to go through Sergeant Barry Morrison.
okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you. My one question I have is, what role does GDOT play in this and on all of their, and maybe John Usher can answer this, with all the bridges and people like that, the people sleeping under the bridges, things not being kept clean under the bridges, like what responsibility or communication do they have with us?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. That's a good question. I haven't discussed this particular issue with GDOT. I can reach out to them and ask them what sort of rules or policies they have on the books. I do know that there are certain parts of the state infrastructure where pedestrians are not allowed because it's unsafe. We'd had that discussion a little earlier about safety in the public right-of-way, like the ramps, for instance. You're not supposed to have pedestrians on and off ramps to freeways. Just as my role as the traffic engineer, there are a series of signs and things that I can install that would assist the sheriff's department as far as areas where they cannot be due to safety reasons, namely if there's no pedestrian infrastructure, the on and off ramps to freeways or interstates. I can't just go down Washington Road and put no pedestrian signs because they're allowed to be there. But there are certain locations where we can get permission from the state to see if we could put up something like that may assist with some of the areas that the panhandlers are.
So, could we meet with GDOT and have that conversation? Because my mind is that they should help us assist in that too. Because if we had a peach orchard where there was a fire underneath the bridge last year, I think it was. could we put, I mean, is it unconstitutional to put signs around bridges that say you can't be underneath this bridge?
If there is an accessible walkway and the correct infrastructure, then a pedestrian is allowed to walk underneath a bridge. As far as like sleeping up underneath, the beams and things, I don't really know the answer to that question, but I can find out. But I know, like I said, there are certain instances where there are certain places you do not want people or bicycles or those types of traffic on parts of the state infrastructure.
Gotcha. Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. I want to ask Sean Rhodes a few questions, if you would.
Sure.
Approach. What is your how should I address you? I don't want to just address you as Sean Rhodes. I want to be official.
That's what I prefer, but just Corporal.
Corporal Sean Rhodes. All right, just want to make sure. All right, so first of all, thank you for all that you're doing, and really to everyone out here who's involved in the task force, thank you for what y'all do. I want to specifically thank you because I've seen you in your boots, I've seen you out, and you're everywhere. Can you give us some insight on our point-in-time numbers for this year? How are we looking in terms of actual homelessness in Augusta, Richmond County right now?
So I don't have the exact numbers, but I do know that we, and you could probably support me on this, increased 21% from the year before. The numbers are a little messed up and skewed because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we didn't go out that year and did a partial count the year before. So we do have an increase. We are seeing unfamiliar faces. We are seeing a lot of people that are coming over here from out of town, gathering up the resources that we should be able to give to our folks, and then going back to wherever they came from.
And they're for sure confirmed to be unhoused, like have nowhere to live right now, or is that what that is? Just a complete confirmed unhoused?
So I'm suspect. Some
Okay.
of them come, they stay for a while, then we don't see them. They say that they're homeless, but where are they going? They're not in any of the shelters, because when we offer resources and we try to keep up with them, and then we can't find them for several weeks, and they're not in any of our shelters. They may be having problems at home, but they're not in this community.
And geographically, where are you seeing? So there's a 21% increase. Where are you seeing that increase? Is it in your downtown corridor? Is it mostly in the Washington Road corridor? Is it countywide? Where are you seeing most of the numbers increasing at?
So I'm going to tell you that as we have focused downtown and on Washington Road with some of the litter and trash issues that we're seeing, we're staying on top of it. They are starting to move out to South Richmond County from what we've been told. So I spoke with Bethany about that. Of course, she organizes all those efforts, and we're going to do some outreach in the South Richmond County area.
Okay. And these are just questions, so I don't want the media to say that we're getting ready to entertain any of this stuff. So these are just questions. But what do we have in place? And it's a shame I even have to say that, right, Corporal?
I understand.
What do we have in place as far as encampments? I know that you've been tremendous with the encampment team. You all go out to the encampments, you talk to folks, you offer resources. What tools do you have to make sure that encampments are properly addressed?
So, unfortunately, usually what happens is it gets called in as litter or in a trash dump. That's what the public sees it as. So we're not actually capturing those numbers as we should. And of course, when we arrive, we have been trained, and our leadership wants us to be, we want to humanize this population. We want to work with them. Everybody has a story, and if they want the help, we want to be able to give it to them. And so we give them the time, give them the resources, give them a ride to the shelter, get the shelter clearance for those that want the help. The ones that don't want the help, we can't allow them to remain on private property. A lot of times the property owner is the one that's called it in. They want their property to be clean. Some of these encampments are very unsanitary. And, there's a big concern, especially, where kids are around. There's a couple that are close to a playground. We go by there, there's needles on the ground. Very little respect for, our residents and
Right.
the children.
Right. So, and I only ask those questions because I want to be able to get a good snapshot here. So we know that you have folks walking up to people at cafes and things like that, but you also have a great number of people who, and I guess in my mind, are actually in need of something, and I want to make sure that we have a good understanding or a good plan in place through the strategic plan to address those who are in need. And I don't know if that looks like us building a day center, getting involved with expanding shelter capacity, having some additional affordable housing options in place. Like if we have dollars set aside, which I'm just guessing that we may have dollars set aside, is let's go ahead and start using those dollars to address the actual need. But then I just have a hard time believing that there's really nothing that we can't do. There's nothing that we can do to really address just everything else. So I'm at a loss because I don't know. But I think if we really just kind of lean in on the biggest thing for me is making sure that we address the actual need, and then whatever else we can do to address the actual panhandling situation, whether that be enforcing the loitering ordinance or whatever, we do that as well. But I wouldn't do one without the other, because then you get into the case of unintended consequences to where you're leaving communities behind. But that's all I have.
I'm a good administrator first. Did you want to speak?
Thank you, Commissioner. In speaking with the City of Charleston in South Carolina, they have a ordinance on the books that prohibits the passing of items from one vehicle outside to another that's standing within the right-of-way or standing within the road. Of course, they consider this to be a safety issue, which piggybacks on what Lieutenant Silas was stating. So we do have something on the books that could assist with the passing of items. Also, in speaking with Columbia County, their ordinance focuses and has a heavy stamp on enforcement. And so I really want us to make sure we narrow down the fact that we have things on the books that we could utilize, but right now we're facing some enforcement challenges. One, do we want everyone arrested? In Columbia County, they most oftentimes issue a warning, and it is up to the officer that is responding to determine what course of action is taken. And so we have the marshal's office, we have the sheriff's office here. I really want to make sure we get clear on what some of those code compliance and what those enforcement issues may be.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Pulliam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And please forgive me if you all already stated this, but I guess this question would be for Attorney Sams. I'd like to know, are there any panhandling ordinances that are not facing any type of litigation or questionable? So in our search for panhandling ordinances across the U.S., did we come across any that, hey, we could actually use most of this to create our own?
So part of the problem is that a lot of this law developed from 2015. So and federal lawsuits take a long time to run through the courts. So I don't have an incredibly good snapshot of what would be survivable. I can say that in the 11th Circuit, that is the federal circuit that includes Georgia, I don't think a single panhandling ordinance has been upheld.
So have we done a search nationwide to look at other panhandling ordinances? Because I get what you're saying as far as the federal courts and us not knowing whether or not there's going to be any that could potentially be tied up in litigation. But are there any in that U.S. search that hopefully we have done, since we're trying to create a panhandling ordinance? Were there any that were found to be, you know what, let's start with this?
So generally we don't. Generally, when I do my research, I don't go beyond the 11th Circuit for federal stuff. Mostly because all of the state law is within Georgia, and so Alabama wouldn't help me interpret Georgia law. And what happens in the sister circuit, while it's persuasive, it doesn't control what happens. So no, I haven't done any research outside of the federal 11th Circuit, as that would only be, as pulling that information would be helpful but not controlling in terms of giving my advice to to my clients.
Thank you.
Commissioner McKnight.
Yes, I was going to mention something to the attorney. Have you been able to look at Dublin, Georgia's ordinance? It is constitutional. It's about 5 pages long. Will you maybe look at that one?
I don't have a copy of the Dublin ordinance. I can certainly take a copy. I have not seen any federal court challenge on the Dublin ordinance. But I would be happy to take a review of it.
Right, I'm going to forward this to Administrator Dowles. Okay.
Thank you. All right. Let's talk about enforcement a little bit. Lieutenant Silas, can we talk? Can you come up? We understand the the shortage and everything, and I don't think any of us is the criminal aspect of this. It's, we need the enforcement piece of it. So my question is, what kind of resources or do you think we need? And number two, do you think that is this something that it could be kind of with the Marshals Department a little bit more than it maybe? I mean, I know it is to a certain extent, but
we're already out there doing it.
Yeah.
We talk about it in roll call every day, and if you don't mind going back to the encampments under the DOT bridges, we actually had a letter from DOT about when they had the big fire up there on I-85, I guess it was. We got a letter stating that we could remove folks from the encampments under the bridges on DOT property. I was trying to find that letter. We have it somewhere, and I can't find it, but we are enforcing the panhandling. We probably get more calls from downtown from the businesses of anything, but the panhandlers out on the intersections, like I say, until they step into the roadway, we basically try to talk to them, offer them the resources, and most of them don't want the resources. We can go back the next day and our pamphlets are on the ground along with the other trash, and so 40-6-97 is the charge that most of us have been using, because once they step into the roadway, that's when the violation is actually occurring. Our ordinance that we have on the book right now, there have been times where I believe when folks go to court for some of that stuff, the cases have been dismissed. It's hard to say what's unconstitutional for these folks, to get out there and beg, because most of their signs are saying they're homeless, and we find out that they're not. So, they're lying, or they will even say they're in the military, and we'll check with United Forces, and the person has never even been in the military, never even registered for the military. And so a lot of it could be theft by deception, in some cases, if we were to push it, or if the solicitor was able to prosecute some of this stuff. So, we're at a hard time with this, and like I say, the biggest charge that we've been using is the 4697, and that's usually a last resort. We try to give them everything we can to get them off of the street corners, off of the out of the parking lots and wherever it may be, and to get them what they need. The soup kitchen feeds every day. If they want a meal, they can go get one. But the bus, we have free bus tickets to give to them. We do that all day long, and they just don't take us up on the offers. They want the money in hand so they can do a lot of other different things.
Okay. Scott, can you come forward? Scott, can you talk about what you do twice a month? I think it's the pickup that you do.
So as far as the trash pickups on the roadways,
Talk about that a little bit.
So the program that our folks started was with the probation through state court primarily and magistrate court. And so what they have organized is certain roadways, whether the commissioners call and say, hey, can you address this roadway, or whether they see it themselves on patrol, they twice a month, they will gather the probationers and they will go and do the roadside cleanups. That's a program we've actually put in to be expanded for next year's budget, and it's under review, obviously. But we have had a lot of positive feedback from that. The other thing I just did want to mention with regards to any ordinance that we would consider, Lieutenant Silas is correct. Every judge interprets things differently. You could take someone in for the panhandling, and one judge may, the courts can be valuable for people, especially with mental illness and drug addiction, in requiring them to go and get the services that they need to become healthy sometimes. But in some other judges have literally berated our officers and handed the defendant, money from the stand, and so it's and our officers leave humiliated when they're asked, by the public to go and stop this problem. So I just want you to understand that, while the law department tries to find a solution, we also have to find something that the courts are going to agree to help us with, magistrates specifically. But with the probation, that's been very successful. The judges are all on board with assigning people to that probation for the roadside cleanups. We've had a lot of traction with that. I don't have the actual numbers that we had, but the tonnage of trash that we picked up off of the roadways just in the months of this year has been pretty incredible for twice a month.
Well, and I appreciate that, because I think, for me anyway, the calls I get are as much about the loitering of things all through Boy Scout Road, Skinner Mill Road, and that they're doing as much as the panhandling in a sense.
Yes, sir.
And so that's why, having more boots on the ground to help clean up the community, I think, is very important. If we can't enforce it, but if we can clean up more, I fully support that. And I wanted the commissioners, because I've talked to you about it, but I wanted the commissioners to hear it, because I think this is a program this is one of the solutions for this issue, because it is an issue.
We've talked to the courts and probation, and they have agreed that if we expand the program, that they could. Probation literally told us, hey, we actually need you to expand it, because the probationers are being sentenced to a number of hours that we're not able to give them based on the 2 times a month that we're actually doing it. And our officers have had great interaction with the probationers. Some of them can't afford to pay fines, and so for them to be able to choose this as an alternative is both helpful to the community and to them.
That's awesome. All right. Any other questions for the people? All right. Thank you, sir. All right. I guess we're going to, where are we at? Probably down at the educational campaign.
We are, and Commissioner, this is a program that I am excited about. The commission brought it to my attention several months ago. Savannah, Georgia kicked off a program called Give Change That Counts. And instead of Augusta recreating the wheel, we've just decided to enhance it a bit. And so we have our public information manager, Danielle Hayes, that I would like to come forward and talk about Augusta's collaboration with Savannah. Please note that this item is on the committee agenda for further discussion next Tuesday, with the hopes that the commission would approve this collaborative effort with Savannah. Ms. Hayes?
Thank you, Mrs. Dowse. Good morning, commissioners. I want to begin by first showing you all what their logo looks like. Give Change That Counts. I want to show the chambers as well. But again, good morning to you all. And Augusta, Georgia is taking steps to team up with the city of Savannah and the Chatham-Savannah Authority for the Homeless to bring their Give Change That Counts initiative to our community. With the use of their marketing designs, their brand guide, and of course their logo, it is our plan to launch the Give Change That Counts public awareness campaign to our city. And the whole purpose of this is to raise education about what panhandling is, and also encourage our community members and visitors to give change that counts by supporting local nonprofits that provide critical services and support to individuals experiencing homelessness or the need to panhandle in public spaces. So although this is a community-wide campaign, our target areas include downtown Augusta, Wrightsboro Road near the Augusta Mall, and Washington Road near I-20. We will use all modes of communication to get the word out about this campaign. And that includes advertisements on social media, television, billboards, and of course, boots on the street. So not only have we received the green light initially from Savannah, they are excited. We know the next step is to bring it to you all in a more formal manner. But I, as a native of Augusta, I have seen this issue increase. And so I'm very excited about this public awareness campaign.
The money that's collected, who does it go to, and then how does it get distributed in Augusta?
I'll answer that. So we will create a website on the city's page. And when our residents go to the website, they'll see different blurbs and links to our local nonprofits who have partnered with us for this initiative. When they click on those hyperlinks, they'll see this logo, and they will give the money directly to those local nonprofits. So the city would never touch any of these dollars. We are just promoting the nonprofits on our website.
And are you going to give us the list of those nonprofits on Tuesday?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Yes.
And we've already met with a vast majority of those nonprofits that are in support of this effort. While we know that every new initiative comes with challenges, Savannah has seen a great decrease in the amount of panhandling simply because the viable efforts of people giving money to people at these intersections have diminished. And so if individuals are no longer receiving funds at that particular spot, they either move on or seek other sources. There are some concerns surrounding how else might those individuals seek the need for funding if they're unable to receive funding from someone panhandling or giving them money through the vehicles. That has been discussed as well. But just from going based off of what Savannah has done, which is a city that we often use for comparable purposes, it has been deemed beneficial. Ms. Hayes was able to join the Savannah team just last week in meeting with the mayor as well as several of their nonprofits to get some feedback into how the program has benefited them. Ms. Hayes, can you speak to that as well?
Yes, I went to their media event where they highlighted their new signage for their Give Change That Counts initiative, their metal signs. I do have an image of that, but they're metal signs that have a QR code that sends residents or visitors to a website where they can give money directly to their Give Change That Counts initiative. Now, the only difference is they have day centers, and this money goes directly to their homeless authority. So ours will be slightly different than that because ours is more of a public awareness campaign. But as Mrs. Dowse has already stated, that the mayor has greenlit this. He's very excited, their homeless authority as well. And so I think this will also greatly benefit our efforts here in Augusta to raise education about panhandling.
How do we make sure that the resources for the nonprofits are being utilized for this and not increase staff and stuff like that? Because that's a concern of mine.
Well, you want to speak to that, Mrs. Jones?
I will. So currently, Augusta does not get into the operations of those nonprofits. And again, because this is a educational campaign, it's up to the donor to determine which organization they would like to give their dollars to. The campaign does not speak to how those funds can be used. And so I don't have a response as far as how that will be mitigated because at this moment we don't manage the nonprofits organizations.
And what about if another nonprofit wants to, because they might handle a certain sector or children in our community that are homeless, like how is that going to be handled if there's other nonprofits that come to the table?
And so we welcome them. But
Okay.
at this point, we are specifically seeking out those nonprofits whose mission is in support of homeless efforts as well as wraparound services. And so, of course, those nonprofits would have to be registered with the state of Georgia as far as receiving a 501c3 as well as be established. And so that we're also working on those guidelines to how you will be included as part of that effort. But again, it's up to the donor to determine who they would like to give their dollars to. Some of those that were at the table include the Salvation Army. I know we have someone from United Way that's here today, as well as the day centers, the homeless shelters, even Garden City Rescue Mission, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I would just ask, and I would ask that you ask Savannah this, do they line item this in their budgets, though? Because when a donor gives money, I work for a nonprofit, they can designate it for a certain area. If Savannah is not line item this budget within these nonprofits, I don't think they're doing, it's kind of a disservice in a sense because they could be using this money for other things. And if we're truly going to use the money for what it needs to be used, I don't understand why a nonprofit wouldn't have a line item for it. So I think it's worth having a conversation with them because I know when I worked in a nonprofit, if I just got money, I could do it on anything I want to. Whereas if it was specific use from the donor, I had to use it for that specific use. So I think that's something to like think about or consider. So, any other questions from the colleagues? Okay. Before we go to a path forward, is there anyone here who hasn't spoken that would like to speak about this issue? I see Jennifer. Do you want to speak? Come on. And introduce yourself because people might not know you.
Sure. I'm Jennifer Bowen with Destination Augusta. I'm the Vice President of Destination Development and Community Engagement. I just want to applaud you for taking a look into this. What our job is to market the city of Augusta to visitors. It is to manage this destination, and it is to ensure a visitor has a positive experience. And so panhandling is having an economic impact on our city of Augusta. Clearly, as you all have said, that it is countywide. We have heard directly from the businesses in the Washington Road, Stevens Creek corridor. We have had multiple conversations with hotels, some with restaurants, other with bars, who are hearing directly from their customers that the first impression of Augusta as they exit the interstate is of a panhandler. And then also it continues, especially in the Washington Road corridor, with the loiterers and a perceived crime and perception area. So the hoteliers are telling us that they are losing business, that the customers are coming, and once they are in the environment and they see what is around them, some of them are immediately canceling their reservations and going elsewhere. They are telling us that long-time customers who've been staying with them for years are canceling their plans. And also, very importantly, that customers are leaving online reviews about not feeling safe, about the perception of crime, and about panhandlers. And from a marketing standpoint, once you have that online review at branded properties, it is very hard to recover from that. So while we know that this is an issue countrywide and in city by city, it is something that, as Commissioner Johnson said, we do want the city to find a way to address the need, but we also have to find a way to deliver a great first impression to our visitors and to help our businesses continue to thrive and receive that economic impact and that revenue.
Any questions for Jennifer? Thank you, Jennifer. And I've been in those meetings as well and appreciate what y'all are doing and having those conversations with them. And so thank you for that. Is anybody else that would like to speak before we talk about a path forward? All right. So path forward. Administrator Dallas, you talked about an ordinance in what county or city was it?
The city of Charleston.
Okay. Can we have that sent to the law department to review and see if, whether we could implement something like that here?
Yes, I'll forward it.
Okay. And then the other path that I had was the GDOT conversation, John, talking about what we can do underneath the bridges or any of the GDOT areas. Also understanding, that letter. I've seen that letter too. We need to get that letter out. But what we can do from a GDOT standpoint, is it from accountability standpoint from them and us, just from the conversations that you have with them, John? Those are the two things that I had. Commissioner Johnson, you have anything else?
No, I think that pretty much covers where we're trying to go. Maybe we need to have some type of follow-up to this meeting just to make sure that things are going on track. And I want to also get HCD looped into this conversation as well, because again, we can't have these conversations without talking about long-term plans to help with shelter expansion, day center building, those types of things, affordable housing as options. I know there are two different conversations, but one should lead to another. So let's get them involved as well.
I agree with that. I think that we should probably come back here in 30 days and let's have the Salvation Army here and talk about what their plans are. And then let's talk about HCD, and then let's talk about the day shelter piece and what the city might commit to in the future or something, because I think at the end of the day, that's the wraparound services is the only key to helping these people. And if they don't want help, then they don't need to be getting the resources. They need to move on if they're not going to willing to get help. But there's so many people that need help. So, Commissioner Scott.
Mr. Friend, Commissioner Friend, I believe Commissioner McKnight referenced
Dublin. Yes, the Dublin. Yes, and the Dublin. So that's the third one. Yes. And then the agenda's kind of already set. We'll talk about those three things as well as coming back with the HCD and the Salvation Army at the table, because it's time we move the ship down the river, because we can't be having this anymore. But I appreciate everybody coming and look forward to coming back here and having this discussion again in October. Thank y'all. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
Okay, because
Go ahead.
I
I'm
know
sorry.
once we do the change, what was the initiative called again?
Give change that counts.
Right, once that's on, because that'll be on committee cycle next week. So any nonprofits that are a part of that should actually be part of the next conversation.
I
So
agree.
all of those nonprofits that are included on that Give Change initiative, they should be part of this conversation
agree.
as well.
Good point. All right. Thank y'all.